And we are live. I am with Stanislav Krapivnik. He is a good friend of the show, and I thank him for coming back on the show. And just to give a proper intro, he is a former U.S. Army officer, supply chain executive, and military political expert, especially on issues pertaining to, obviously, Russia. Stas, welcome to the show, man, and thank you for joining me.
Yeah, no problem.
So
background, still on vacation, so.
Well, and even more of an appreciation for it, especially since I screwed up yesterday. You know what's wild about it? I was here at 4:00 yesterday, and I was like, I checked the email, and I looked at the wrong email, and I was like, oh God, I got it wrong.
Yeah.
And at that point, everything just kind of tumbled into, absurdity. But I do thank you for joining me.
I was looking at it, I was like, wait a minute, I didn't say anything about Friday, and I looked at the date of it, it's like 2nd of July. Like, oh, okay. That's you want to know on email.
I have very poor vision. And when I looked at the email, the first thing I saw was, oh God, Saturday. I didn't even look at the date on the email. No, man, I apologize. And you have my thanks for joining me.
No problem.
Let's start with Germany, because I was fascinated by the story. Germany has, the Merz government apparently has a secret plan because they're concerned about the AfD, Alternative for Deutschland. This is an organization that is effectively complained about the war because of the effect it was having on the German population. And the German population seems to be amenable to the AfD. Now, this scares the hell out of the German government, obviously scares the hell out of NATO. And apparently Merz is trying to find a way to circumvent the AfD if in case they win, and if in case Germany ends up in a war with Russia. Now, these plans apparently were secret, and these plans apparently got leaked, which is the reason why I'm bringing this up. Now, I'm amazed by this story. There's a denigration of any notion of real democracy and governance in these countries, especially if they run against what NATO wants in regards to this kind of larger war against Russia. And this, wildly enough, runs contrary to what seems like the population wants, who's apparently voting for this bloc. They seem to misunderstand what any notion of democracy or representative government means. There are times where the population is like, we don't like what you are doing, and we are trying to pull the reins. And it seems like the German government is resisting the population pulling the reins, saying, hey, this is not what we want. Go into this for me. I mean, especially considering the last war was against Germany, and these guys are trying to find a way to start another one.
Well, we know that the AfD is an extremist right Nazi party. This because the head of the AfD is a lesbian, and one of her top lieutenants is a Turk. So they're obviously extreme racial supremacists. And we also know that they're extreme Nazis because they're proposing having peace break out, and nobody can handle peace break out. Peace is evil. So obviously They're evil because they want peace, and they want controlled immigration, and they want, go back to nuclear power or anything else that's rational. And we know that they're Nazis because everybody that's not a Nazi wants solar panels and windmills. Of course, Germany has this little problem in the winter where snow falls on the solar panels. It's cloud cover almost nonstop. And and the wind doesn't blow. But that's minor issues. That's all that can be taken care of somehow or other. So we know they're Nazis. Obviously, they're Nazis who want peace and stable economics and electricity to heat your homes. And have, God forbid, have Turks in there mixed in with Germans. Obviously, these people are extremists, and they have to be controlled. It's for democracy. To save democracy, you have to destroy anybody that isn't agreeing with you. That's how multipolarity works. Everybody agrees to the same thing, or they get sanctioned for using their freedom of speech incorrectly, like certain journalists in Germany, where you can't buy, sell, get gifts, or work. So you can kind of starve there as an example for everyone else how to properly use your free speech.
Pretty much.
Oh, and they'll also switch your parents, close your parents' accounts too, just in case, they're helping you out or they want to breed another kid just like you. So, they don't make a second copy. That's how democracy works. That's exactly how democracy works. All the parties agree to the same thing and they hold the same platform, and they want war because, that's democracy.
It's outrageous. Like, meaning these guys.
I know. It is outrageous. These guys complain that war is bad and we should make peace and have sound economics. I mean, these people are extremists. They're the edge of the edge. They are a threat to all of humanity. They need to be gotten rid of. Usually in a concentration camp with firing squads or gas chambers. That just to me make it more efficient, because that's what freedom is all about.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane. They keep doing this. They keep finding ways
I need to put? Yeah. Do I need to put sarcasm tags on that, or somebody's
no,
probably
watching? I totally get sarcasm. Right?
It's
like this lesbian is obviously a Nazi because she believes that Germany should go back to oil and stop the war and all of this other stuff. Yeah, it's insane.
and nuclear power. Yeah, God forbid that happens.
And by the way, they did this to Karl Gogescu. This was taking place in Romania when he was obviously the candidate that was going to win that race. It obviously took place in Ukraine, where they overthrew the government of Ukraine because Ukraine was going to basically pause on a deal that the European Union wanted to force Ukraine into. Meaning they do this when it's bucking what they necessarily want. And they did it to, what's her name, in France, where they were trying to keep her out the race. And now they have her with an ankle monitor. It'll come. Her name.
They've done it more than that. Le Pen, Marie Le Pen.
That's it. Marie Le Pen. Yes.
Yeah.
So
but they did it to Orban. Look, the Orban's government showed that they showed that money that was being laundered from Brussels to Kiev and from Kiev to the opposition in Hungary. So, yes. They did it they've done it in Armenia, where I think there was like only 200 out of like 1,000 something polling stations were actually counted. And all of a sudden the count said, okay, he won. That's it. We don't need to count. For Pashinyan, they did it. They tried to overthrow the Georgian elections from internally. I was there when that was happening. Lots of Italians, Spaniards, others, just Liberalism International. They just throw these guys to whatever election they need to steal, whichever country. Let's see where else they've done it in Moldova on multiple occasions. They tried to do a color revolution in Belarus. That didn't work out. Yeah, that's a standard approach for democracy. Look, you got democracy when you saw democracy in its purest form when the EU Constitution, they were trying to pass it, and the Irish voted no, so they voted again, and they still voted no, and they voted again, and they still voted no, and I think it was the fourth time that they just got a 51% majority, so they didn't have to vote a fifth time. Yeah, because that's how democracy works.
Yeah, that looks like something.
Buy out a few more people, vote a little more. Buy out a few more people, vote a little more. We'll keep voting till we get the results we need. Democracy.
Yeah, that's democracy. That's the new term buzzword for quote democracy unquote. From here on out, I'm putting it in quotes. Yeah, because this is obviously something else. Look, I think the wild part about it though is it's almost like Germany hasn't accepted the fact that they lost 2 wars, and the second one was punishing from the standpoint of the Soviet Union. It looks like they still want to settle scores, and despite the fact that they're not in a position to have this fight, it's just wild to me that they're teeing up without swords. Is the point that I'm making. So,
I think. Well, first of all, listen to what the elites say. They're defending their democracy. That means that elite club, they'll have a little vote and they'll pick out their new leader of their little elite club. You ain't part of it. Everybody else ain't part of this club. It's their democracy, not your democracy, not my democracy. It's their democracy. So having said that, since we're all not part of the big club, look, for the Germans, if the Germans start World War III, that's 3 world wars in just a little over 100 years. When the Russian army comes into Berlin for a 4th time in 300 years, it'll be the last time the Russian army comes into Berlin. Berlin and all that area is going to become Russian. It was formerly Slav anyway, Sorbs. And Project Germany is going to be closed for good. Ain't ever going to be a unified Germany again in any shape or form.
Does Russia take this?
Oh, extremely. Look, if you look at it, just the difference in the way things happened. East Germany was denazified. That's, by the way, East Germany is the home base of the AfD. They've been very denazified. West Germany was never denazified. Sure, they took away the symbols, the swastika, the SS, and all that. They took the symbols away. Yeah. But after the top leadership of the Nazi Party, the National Socialist Workers' Party, were hung or went to jail for a very long time, the second and third tier in the west of Germany, they were put right back into power. A good chunk of them went to the U.S. to work on different projects. The Gestapo went right back, became German intelligence. German generals went right back into the Wehrmacht, and can't remember the guy's name, but one of them was the head of NATO. And a lot of these politicians, the German Nazi politicians, were recycled right back into the West German government. So the West Germans were never denazified, and we see that. They're the ones who, in the majority, are supporting the Uniparty. All the other parties, because they're uniparty because they all just want war. So Germany was never denazified. But like I said, the Russian army has taken Berlin 300 times. I mean, 300 times, 3 times in 300 years. So if it has to take it a 4th time in that 300-year span, you can damn well be assured we're keeping it. Pretty sure all property rights at that point.
Right.
Yeah,
we're not doing it for a 4th time. If we have to do it a 3rd time, we're keeping it.
Yeah, exactly. There's a town called Potsdam, west of Germany, of Berlin. That was built
by there in winter, actually. Gorgeous.
Potsdam was built by Catherine the Great.
I didn't know
that. That was a town built for Russian veterans that were too injured to return back to Russia. They could live there. Once she died, her son, Paul III, he idolized Frederick, who was at that point the not so great, and handed him over everything that Catherine had conquered out of Frederick, for which he wound up getting choked to death by his generals eventually, and his youngest son, or his oldest son, Alexander I, came to the throne. He just gave it all away. Yeah, take it back. Be great again. Yeah, here you go. Make Frederick great again. Here you go. So he put Prussia back on the map. Yeah, it's a messed up history.
Yeah, Potsdam was gorgeous, especially in the winter.
Yeah, but Potsdam was built by Catherine the Great.
Wow, that's amazing.
The thing is Berlin. If I remember, the original name of Berlin was Berlog, which meant city in the swamp. That entire eastern German area is Sorbs, or was Sorbs. There's still some small enclaves of Sorbs. Sorbs are Slavs, Western Slavs. So they got either pushed out, exterminated, or Germanized over the centuries. So, but yeah, that's all formerly Slavic land. Yeah. And maybe again.
Well, it may be again. Right, exactly. They keep messing around. It may be again. The other thing I wanted to hit was the missile that landed in Poland. Now, I was fascinated by the story, even though the story didn't get a huge amount of headplay or airplay. The reason I was fascinated by it is, if you remember, there was a Ukrainian missile that landed on a house, I think it was last year. And there was questions about whether or not Europe was going to run with this, because in reality, it doesn't really matter. They could have totally said this was a Russian missile that hit a house, and et cetera, killed a farmer. Come to find out, a Ukrainian missile, in which case it brought down the hysteria. And there have been Ukrainian missiles that have been invading European airspace left and right or washed up on European shores. And then you get this missile that lands in Poland that creates a huge hole in the ground. And they pointed out that this was a Russian missile. Russia hasn't necessarily put out too many denials about this. I haven't heard any denial, to be honest. And they basically make the point of saying this missile went off course and hit a particular part of Poland. What's interesting to me is that Poland is not screaming about this, and Europe is not screaming about this at the volume that I thought that they may be screaming about it, considering if indeed this is a Russian missile invaded Polish airspace and landed on Polish territory. What do you make of this? I mean, and maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe you've heard something that I haven't heard on this, but I haven't heard denials from the Russians, and I haven't heard a huge amount of screaming out of Europe. Why?
Well,
and maybe that question is
Ukraine
simple,
still.
I'm very curious to your take.
No. Ukraine still has a higher death toll of Poles than Russia. They killed 2 guys on a tractor when they dropped a missile on top of them. This one just hit
Yes.
up in the middle of the. But there was also an incident where supposedly a Russian drone destroyed a farmhouse. And then it turned out, it was a Russian. There were several Russian drones that were flying in, but they were duct taped together. So basically, these are recon / decoy drones that
Right.
Russia fires in to draw off fire before the actual kamikaze drones come in. And the Ukrainians have put them together, but they were so damaged they literally duct taped these things together, and they launched them into Poland. And the Polish Air Force responded, and the Polish Air Force fired missiles, and one of those missiles hit a farmhouse and took out the roof. So they're trying to blame it on Russia. And then they had one of these drones land on top of somewhere nearby. It landed on top of another house. So this is where we got the photographs of this drone that's literally been duct taped together. I mean, literally duct taped together. I guess I couldn't even glue it or something. I mean, this looks like something right out of a redneck how-to manual. Your drone's broken. Don't worry, son. You got duct tape. Duct tape will fix anything. Well, just duct tape the drone back together and send it right off. And there you go. This is on that level. Why is Poland acting this way? Well, those. You remember about 2 weeks ago, maybe it was 3 weeks ago now. We had a bunch of articles pop up about how Russia might invade Poland out of Kaliningrad. Just any day now, Russia's going to invade. Why did those pop up? They all popped up because Novorisk, who, true, he admitted that he talks to the ghost of Polsitsky every day, but okay, everybody has their thing. Maybe he really is talking to a ghost. I don't know. But I think when he came to power, he was in for a big shock because the Poles had buried about 10,000 of their soldiers as mercenaries. So what the Poles were doing is to get combat experience, they were rotating battalions into Ukraine to go fight in the front line, of course, as mercenaries. And they were taking a lot of casualties. The first time I went down to the front lines, it was 24th of December, 2022. It was Catholic Christmas, which is probably why I'm alive. Because there were a couple areas that could have just blown us right off the road on a line of sight. But nobody was firing because, and we were in this big white van. It's 24th of December. We leave Moscow. It's knee-deep snow. And we get to Lugansk province, and it's all green and mud. There's not a drop of snow anywhere. It's raining. It's green grass. We stood out like a sore thumb. But the Poles took about 10,000 dead, and I don't know how many wounded. So I think when Novorisk got there, he was in for a shock, so he backed the hell off. And now they've got really crap relationships. In fact, last polls, something like 74% of Poles hated Ukrainians and wanted to get rid of them, one way or the other.
Right.
And Poland claims Western Ukraine while we're at it. And in Western Ukraine, a lot of people that carry the Polish card. The Polish card is given out to people with Polish ancestry of, I'm not quite sure what amount exactly. that gives them basically all the rights except for voting. They're almost citizens. They can move into Poland anytime. They can, they can come in and go. It's like a second-class passport, but it's given to non-citizens, but people of Polish heritage. So Poland's got its eye on Western Ukraine, obviously enough. They don't want the Banderites there. They'd prefer that they all die off on the battlefield in Russia. Russia prefers that Poland has to deal with them instead of Russia, where we're at it. But and there's one other issue here. What has anybody read Article 5 of the NATO Charter?
Yes.
It does not say everybody goes to fight for whatever country. It says we will hold consultations to see what we can do as assistance. So somebody may send a tank division assistance, somebody may send 1,000 blankets or some MREs, and somebody's going to put a candle, go, we're done. Assistance granted. That's the reality of Article 5. So, a lot of countries, particularly in the European South, they're not interested in going to war with Russia. Look, the Croats already flat out said, hell no. The Bulgarians just got rid of the pro-war government, and the new government's going, no. The Czechs and the Slovacs aren't in any interest. The Hungarians and the Magyar probably will. I don't think the Hungarian people are too thrilled with that idea. They might not quite have realized who the hell they voted in. Let's see, who else have we got? Romanians are about 50-50, but the Romanians have been, no offense to Romanians, but historically Romanians have been crap soldiers for the last couple hundred years. So that's a point there. Poles don't seem to be too thrilled. The Italians, I don't know, but the Italians were the first to come up with Velcro patches on Velcro for the patches, and we used to laugh at that. This was in the 90s, because everybody else had sewn on patches at that point, but they were ahead of their times. They had Velcro, but the joke was the reason they have Velcro is Italy hasn't finished. Yeah, Italy hasn't finished a world war on the same side it started yet. So it's like, what are we fighting on now? Oh, that's the new guys. Get the patches on real quick. The Spanish and the Portuguese probably won't fight. So what does that leave you with? That's half a NATO that's going to go, bye. We're not interested. Thanks. Have your fun. We're not really interested in playing this game. So I don't know. That's I think. Yeah.
I mean, is that your point? You don't think NATO basically you think NATO is a paper tiger? You don't think they would spin up to a war, or do you?
A portion of NATO would. The pre-Baltic statelets, the parasite statelets, they would. But their leadership all has secondary passports to some other country. They're not going to stick around when the war starts. Let the plebes go die off. We're going to go to England or the U.S. The Scandinavian countries all seem to be insane. Finland seems to be frothing at the mouth, insane. Even as it becomes the armpit of Europe once more. It takes a lot to go to take a successful economy that's tied to Russia by trade and murder it and say we've won. That's at that point you're just gonna go, yeah, gentlemen, you won. You won the Darwin Award on a national scale. Would like to be nominated as a whole nation. That's a first. Who else? The Germans probably will spin up, at least the West Germans. Maybe the French under Emperor Napoleon IV Macron, or is it Macron Napoleon IV? The British probably will spin up. The British are good at starting world wars. And they always want to get Germany and Russia to kill each other and then pick up the pieces. But the problem is they keep getting sucked into these wars themselves and getting wiped out as their empires got wiped out. So I don't know. I mean, you've got basically Northern Europe that'll probably spin up the fight, but that's already half of NATO. The Turks, big question whether they go in or not. They're making money off both ends. They could, but they're the second largest army in Europe in NATO, and I highly doubt the U.S. is going to go die for Europe. They'll make money off of it. Oh yeah, they'll sell weapons and fuel as a neutral party. Their job is to get NATO fighting and then get the hell out of it. Oh, sorry, we're neutral now. But if you want to buy some tanks, we'll happily ship to you. Give us some gold. Your young children, whatever.
Missiles, Patriots.
Yeah. Oh, the Patriot. Have you seen Professor Postal's analysis of the Patriot success rate?
No, I haven't seen his analysis, but I've seen the Patriots. They suck.
They do.
I mean, like, you have to fire so many of them. They're extremely expensive, and they often miss. Over and over again.
Often is an understatement. Well, first of all, when the first Gulf War happened, I wasn't there. I was. I'll just say that I just finished up high school. I wasn't actually going to go in the military because the recruiter in my high school said, "You're Russian. They'll never let you near a tank." Then I became an armor officer. But at that point, I was like, "Oh, fine, fuck you too." And then eventually, I still wound up. Blood is blood. Come from a military family. But a friend of mine was who was a cadet with me. He was an enlisted guy in a combat engineer unit. And they were stationed right beside the Patriots. So Saddam was firing Scuds. A Scud is an R-11 missile, ballistic missile. R-11s are guided strictly by a gyroscope, and they fall on top of the target when the fuel runs out. So you fuel it up just to get it to the target. They are about as inaccurate as it gets for a ballistic missile. But if they're carrying a nuclear warhead or a gas warhead, if you, particularly with a nuke, if you're off a little, nobody cares. But if you're a high explosive and you're off a little and you're blowing up empty desert, that kind of loses its effect. Well, the R-11 Scud is slow, flies straight. It has no maneuverability of any kind. It's a pretty primitive weapon. And he said, they'd have them flying in. I mean, you would think this would be the optimal target for an anti-aircraft system. This is like a test regime, right? The speed, the direction. They're not maneuvering. The wind might blow them a little one way or the other, but they're not maneuvering, right? He said he'd listen up to 5 Patriots going off before they'd actually be able to hit it. Well, Raytheon. Then there was a scandal. Actually, it turned out it was Professor Postal that started that scandal. There was a scandal after the war that the Patriots were actually a piece of crap. They couldn't really do anything. So that was a big scandal. Apparently, Raytheon had faked all the data, all the testing data. And now on this one, so the Patriot was developed. It's a decent enough missile against airplanes, right? Fast movers, jets, jet aircraft. It's decent enough against jet aircraft. Well, the PAC-3 was developed specifically to take on ballistic missiles, not hypersonics, just ballistics. Now, ballistic missiles, they can go as fast as a hypersonic, right? Ballistic missiles can go when they're going, particularly the ones that go are long range ballistics that go up to the edge of space in the stratosphere, arc over and start going down. They can get up to Mach 8, Mach 9, easy. The thing is, they are a ballistic missile. As long as you have enough time and space, and its velocity, it's vector of movement, right, you can predict where it's going because it's going in a hyperbolic arc. I mean, it's predictable. And then you can supposedly pop some missiles up in its way, as opposed to hypersonics, which are maneuverable. They're going just as fast, except they're all over the place. And no computer system can predict where it's going to be. So, you've got big problems with that. Well, from what Postal was showing, they've got a hit rate of about 4 to 5%.
What?
Yeah,
almost
exactly.
That's almost pointless.
That's almost basically spitballs. And there was a story by the Ukrainian grandma that took out a Russian hypersonic missile with a jar of pickles. She was on her roof with a jar of pickles. Don't ask me why she was on her roof with a jar of pickles, and a Russian hypersonic going at 3 kilometers per second. But her mind was analytical, and she tossed that jar of pickles up just in time to take it out. It was quite. This goes right up there with the ghost of Kiev, right? You know.
Oh wait, this is a real story. I thought you were joking. This is a real story.
They put it out as a real story. Yeah. Ukrainian propaganda at its best.
That is fantastic. It's like I threw the jar of pickles at the right time to hit the hypersonic missile. And even though it destroyed the warehouse and everything else, the grandma effectively took it out. That's like saying the warehouse took out the missile. Yeah, okay.
Well, that's the new secret. That is the new secret anti-aircraft systems in Kiev. The warehouses jump up and grab a missile. Right. Yeah. It works 100% of the time. They take the drones and missiles right out of the sky. They just jump up, absorb the hit, and fall back down. Yep. 100% of the time, they take the missile out.
That's a damn shame. I can't believe they put something like that up. That is hilarious.
They had Tank Girl. They had a story of Tank Girl at this was in 23, who serviced 11 tankers. I'm sorry, who destroyed 11 tank crews. They've been running these bullshit stories nonstop. People still believe them. That's the worst part is, I mean, there's so many stupid people in this world. They go, oh, well, this one's got to be right. Okay, sure.
Those people work at U.S. media like Financial Times who, it's like they can't accept what seems to be taking place. In fact, one of the other interesting parts to the story is Odessa and the port and Russia's blockade of the port. I mean, Russia has effectively shut down the economy from the standpoint of items coming into Ukraine or items being sold out of Ukraine. And I was reading, I think it was Rodevka, it was one of the Sloviansk, but they were pointing out the number of ships that Russia has effectively taken out. Like the number is astonishing. Like meaning they have effectively shut down the Odessa ports. And this is having some kind of detrimental effect on a Ukrainian economy in regards to their ability to ship grain, certain products out those ports. I mean, I think that story has been getting a little bit more play. And I guess this falls into the last question I have with Syrskyi. Is the fact that Syrskyi was fired having some kind of impact on what's taking place regarding the front lines? What are we looking at regarding the current frontline situation in regards to the war?
Well, Odessa is not just the only port. There's ports south and north of Odessa, and ports on the Danube River. It's not a lot of Danube River territory, but I think there's like 7 or 8 ports altogether. They've all been shut down. They've all been destroyed. International shipping going in have been warned. If they didn't turn around, they get hit. That's just it. Yes. Yeah, but Ukraine started all this. Obviously, they hit multiple ships, non-Russian ships, by the way, and they hit a lot of ships in the Azov. They hit a lot of ships in Central and Eastern Black Sea. They've even hit multiple ships coming in and out of the Bosphorus Straits in Turkey. Tankers are heading up to fill up in Novorossiysk. And by the way, fill up on on U.S./Kazakh oil. The Caspian Oil Authority, that runs out of Tengiz, which is western Kazakhstan, runs a pipeline up through Russia to Novorossiysk. The Caspian Oil Authority is 50% Chevron, 5% Lukoil, and 45% Kaz oil. Actually, there may be another partner. I don't remember if Exxon's anywhere in there or not. But it's basically 50% American. They've lost. I think Chevron's like $4 or $5 billion on this year, and Kazakhstan's lost about $4.5 billion so far and counting. With Ukraine hitting tankers, a Greek tanker coming in to fill up, there are other tankers. So Russia finally escalated in the Black Sea. And they've closed down the ports and they've hit any ship coming in, regardless of what flag is flying. Maersk, as a matter of fact, said that's it. We're not allowing anybody from our fleet. And Maersk is the biggest shipping company in the world. So that's it. We're not going to Ukraine anymore. It's not worth the risk. And the risk in general on any insurance policies coming in it's got to be skyrocketing by this point. Because who wants to put a tanker in that's going to be guaranteed to be hit? So that's for Ukrainians, those ports served several points, not just export of wheat and sunflower seeds and oil and things like that, but also weapons coming in and weapons going out. Because Ukraine is a black market military hub for heavy weapons and light weapons from the U.S. When 777 howitzers are disappearing, this isn't a matter of I open up my trunk of my car, throw a couple hand grenades, a few AKs, maybe a few Javelin missiles in there, and go sell them off to somebody that's going to go sell them in the Middle East or someplace else. These are actual howitzers that are disappearing. There was a report done by a U.S. NGO that something like 1/3 of the heavy tube artillery that was provided to Ukraine never reached a battlefield.
Right.
This is stuff that went to port. Obviously, you're not going to hide a howitzer in the back of your trunk, your car. These they went to port. You put them in a ship and you bury them in grain, and you ship them out. And on top of that, when they had the grain deal, Ukraine was using the Green Corridor to launch drone attacks on Russia. So Russia shut that down. And now Russia's just shut down the ports of Ukraine, period.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you another story that I've heard from very... I'll tell you another story that I've heard from some very good... first of all, Odessa is flooded with British Mi-6 and British SOS. Well, back in the 1880s, Odessa had a plague outbreak, right? And it was pretty bad. And Odessa was cordoned off. The entire province was cordoned off by the Russian military. They wouldn't let anybody in and out until it burned itself out. So when it burned itself out, there were a lot of corpses in Odessa. So what the people did was, because they were afraid of burning them and spreading the plague again. Are you there?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Hello? Stas, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, I can hear you. There might have just
what the
been a
people
lag,
did after the plague is they buried the bodies in the middle of, close to the middle of town, and they built a big mound on top of dirt to pack it all down and keep the bodies there, the plague bodies. Well, from what I've been told, the British have mined that hill. They're still to blow it up and maybe infestation if and or when the Russian army are.
That is, if that's true, that's other level. If that's true, that's, like to call that depraved is an understatement. To call that depraved is an understatement. Last question before I let you go. The battlefield situation on the ground, where are we in that sense? I know the Russians have started to surround Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and this kind of last thematic struggle from Samplin to the Donbass is beginning to take place. Where are we in that last time play? Oh, he's frozen. He's frozen. Come on. Okay. Stas will be back. To be honest, we're at the end of it anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. Yeah. Okay. There is obviously a connection issue. I don't know if Stas is going to be back. This was the end of it anyway. So it's perfectly fine if he is not. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to close it. Yeah, everybody's saying Stas froze. That's fine. That's fine. That's fine. He was here. He made the 30 minutes. And to be honest, I was pushing past the 30. So shout out to Stas for that. Stanislav Krapivnik. He has my appreciation. He has my thanks. And obviously, I'll have him back to talk more about the military situation. But great breakdown from his part. I thank you for it. I thank you for it. If you guys dig this content, you support it. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat memberships. If you are subscribed, or if you've come to this content but you haven't necessarily subscribed, oh, there he is. Stas, I was at the end anyway, so I was going to close it. Yeah. But please, no, you're perfectly fine.
Yeah. So the British apparently have mined Plague Hill in Odessa to blow it up, because I guess the plague would still be the plague bacteria would still be alive on the bodies, from 100-some years ago. So as a booby trap, I guess, if and or when the Russian army arrives in Odessa. So yeah, so I mean, you get, I don't know if it's true or not, but like I said, my sources are pretty good, so I am trusting more than likely it is, and it's something that the SAS would do.
Yeah, that's depraved. If that's true, that's depraved. That's
it's very depraved. It's the British.
One last thing. What is the battleground like currently? Like, meaning from the standpoint of the front lines in regards to Kramatorsk, Sloviansk. I know that the Russians have started their siege of these territories, which is ultimately, in case the audience don't know, the last battleground in Donbass.
So we've got, well, that area. Okay, so there's three actions going on. One, there's a forward movement of the Russian forces up to Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and the Russian military at its closest point to actually Kramatorsk is about 5.5 kilometers out. They paused forward movement to consolidate across the line because they had several spear points going in, and they had several Ukrainian pockets in between that had to be cut off and destroyed. So now they've evened up the front line and they're starting to push forward again. Then you have the pincher movement. You have the pincher movement from coming up from Konstantinovka. That's in this one small village just before Druzhkivka. They're in the middle of that village fighting now. That's in the south, and that they're coming up on the road that goes right through all three of the towns. And in the north, they're cleaning up right now in Krasny Liman. Krasny Liman's about 10 kilometers northeast of Sloviansk, and you can see Sloviansk from it below because Krasny Limansk is on high ground. So artillery has better range, drones have better capabilities. So that's sooner than later. That's going to be finished up on the cleanup, and they'll spend some time reorganizing and then moving forward again towards Sloviansk. So you'll get this pincher movement and a forward facing combat movement. But there's also another thing that's happening is in DNR, Dobropolye, the Russian army came up to Dobropolye. They invested the first very edge of it, and they stopped. So they fixed the Ukrainian troops in Dobropolye in place, and now they're just moving in different directions away from Dobropolye, while there's a fixing force left in Dobropolye to make sure the Ukrainians don't leave to go anywhere else, otherwise they'll lose the city. Right. The main point is there is a spike going up northwards out of Dobropolye that's going to be coming up behind Druzhkivka and Kramatorsk. And the problem for the Ukrainians is what we've seen in the previous 4 years is, this conglomeration isn't just north to south, it's also east to west. So every time the Ukrainians were pushed out of one pre-prepared fortress city or town, they had to go back maybe 3, 4, 5 kilometers, and they were in the next one, and then the next one. And now this is it. This is the last ones. Behind them is just open fields, a couple small villages that aren't prepared. some small amount of field fortification, which is basically trenches. So there's no line to be fortified. Whatever is built in open fields, and that's that way all the way to the Dnieper. So this is it for them. This is when this falls, and it will fall. There is no more fortified towns and villages. It's open field, and Russia frees up a whole lot of strength that's now concentrated in that area. So they've got big problems. They've got big problems in northeast Kharkiv Oblast. That's basically in Russian hands now. They've got big problems in Sumy with the Russian army near the edge of Sumy. Orikhiv in the south is being surrounded from 3 different sides and is already tactically surrounded because N08 that runs through Orikhiv, the main highway, it is under aviation, artillery, and drone control. So they can't really get anything in and out. So that's the situation right now. So when they say, nothing's happening, they say that constantly, don't they?
Yeah.
So believe the pocket monkey press of the West, or believe what's going on for real.
Well, they were trying to make the argument that Ukraine was somehow winning and that they've somehow turned the tables on the Russians. At least that's what they were trying to put out here. I mean, mind you, Constantine.
Oh yeah, we were all digging tank trenches outside of Moscow now.
Yeah, it's wild. Like, you would think that we were in an alternate reality. I mean, I thought that when I was working at the radio station. But even now, when they come out with stories like Ukraine is having these theatrical explosions, so obviously they were winning. And it's like, dude, Constantinople just fell. It's like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Like, on the battlefield, they are losing, and yet the West was trying to present this like they were winning. That's, man, you have my appreciation. No, please finish. I'm sorry. There's
I was going to say there's a Russian joke that was floating around early on that's still relevant. 2 Russian infantrymen are sitting in Kiev looking at each other. It's like, damn, we sure did lose the information war, didn't we?
We lost so hard. We took Kiev, right?
Yeah. Oh, the Ukrainians are winning constantly. They're doing strategic advancements to the west.
Yep. They're
back toward Kiev.
Hard to the back. They're obviously winning. Yeah. It's wild. Stas, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. Great. Damn it, not my glasses. Yep. Great breakdown as always. The audience loves you. I always think your content is great. Stas has his own channel, by the way.
Thank you.
When is your next show? So the audience will know.
Yep. Well, I've got a couple shows that are just recorded that I'm popping up. I'm still on vacation. I'll be on the road soon enough, so I won't be doing any shows while I'm on the road, heading back. But I just put one out with Cameron McGregor. Posted it up a couple of hours ago. So check it out. Cameron's great as always. I'm not implying any relations to any other McGregors. I'll let you figure that one out on your own.
That's perfect.
But yeah, and before that, I had Cynthia McKinney, also a great person. If you're familiar with her, really good. She was she was a representative from Georgia, House of Representatives. So she got forced out because she wouldn't take the bribes.
So, pretty much.
She didn't become an APEC baby. By the way, have you seen the woman of, as they say in the South, of unfortunate looks? Laura Loomer, who is now a huge fan of Zelensky after criticizing him for several years. It's amazing. She said, I saw the light. It's amazing what $2 million of light can get you. She got brought over by Akhmatov, who was a Ukrainian oligarch who got kicked out of and lost his mines and other things in Donbass. So he's a little bitter. But it's amazing how much light $2 million in your pocket will bring you.
And
the enlightenment is just
on a dime. I mean, and amazing how you can flip on a dime. Like, how do you take a policy? You take a position for years, and then almost overnight, you're this hardened Ukrainian, patriot living in America. Like it's
What's
wow.
even worse is she's talking to the head of Azov, who's a Nazi, and Azov is a Nazi outfit. It's a Nazi from the I am a proud Jewiness or whatever it's called. She's a Zionist, but but she has no problem talking Nazi stuff. But don't you think the symbolism is just it's just bad? It looks bad. Yes, it's not quite what it's supposed to mean. It's just historical. Yeah, SS. It's all just historical. SS. But it would be very hard to get rid of. Yes, but it's just the view of it. Okay. Oh, by the way, Azov. Just to understand, it was when Azov was just a battalion when it was started. It was bankrupt by a certain gentleman by the name of Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky is one of Ukraine's oligarchs. He created Zelensky. He put him up into power. And by the way, he's now in jail because Zelensky betrayed him. But that's not the main issue. Kolomoisky has a second citizenship. Guess with which country?
Israel.
And since he started an out and open SS battalion of not neo-Nazis but flat out Nazis, do you think Israel relieved him of his citizenship? Oh hell no! He's rich.
No. Yes.
So the hypocrisy at this point.
Nazism and Zionism are very similar in regards to what they do, how they act, how they behave. They work very well in tandem with one another. It's not like there's a dramatic departure between the two.
Exactly.
I know it sounds counterintuitive, but no, you're right. It
isn't. It isn't counterintuitive at all.
Yeah, they work very well.
Nazism isn't limited just to a German ethnicity. It's limited to at least two ethnicities, the Übermensch and the Untermensch. Write in whichever you want, and there you go. National Socialism works just as well in Israel as it did in Germany. So don't worry about it. It can work in anywhere. At the end of the day. Yeah, exactly. So, So there, Kolomoisky, who's Jewish, who started, as he put it, he's a Jewish Banderite. Don't even start. How ludicrous that is, but we live in a very sick, upside down world right now.
How bizarre is that?
That's 1984 bizarre. I mean, that's 1984 bizarre right there. The party will tell you what the truth is.
Regardless of how contradictory these things are. Yeah. Man.
He says, why don't you just kill me? We will, but first we're gonna break you. It's a matter of principle.
We must break you first. Then you can die. Dads, I appreciate this, man. You be safe. You enjoy the rest of your vacation. I thank you for this, especially considering what took place yesterday. You have a damn good day, man. Thank you for this. Be safe. Okay?
You too.